Hi guys, good evening. How are you? Welcome you to another live class. And this is Harshit Bhardwaj, lesson number I think 9, Kanthapura, and some answer writing tips. So those who are logged in, please tell your friends. Can you hear me fine? Hi, can you hear me fine? Good evening, Varun, Vicky. I'm using the Bluetooth. Can you hear me fine? That's what I want to know first. Prelim results are out. So who's who? What's happening? Anyone in the group cleared it? What's the cutoff? The general cutoff. Voice is breaking. Okay. Okay, so we'll just use the laptop. पेन चला देना बस. क्या है वहाँ पे?
Okay, now it should be fine. Okay. Only the roll numbers are out. So, do we know? Do we know anyone in our group, in your Telegram group, who's cleared it? Okay, let's hope some. I had 5 students who were hopeful of clearing the prelims and starting the preparation. They started the preparation. Let's see. Hmm. Kantapura we did last time. We wanted to do some questions, some basic questions as if what all. What idea of India does he awaken to? What is the metaphysic India? How does the awakening is shown in the book? Now the question is 2009. It's a big question. Um, I don't know how many of them cleared. All 5 of them. I have no idea. Uh, so the question is, would it be appropriate to comment that the real protagonist of Kantapura is India? The idea The metaphysic India that Murthy finally awakens to. It's an old question, 2009, big 60 marker, but there have been a lot of variations of this question. One thing that is certain with Kanthapura is that the real protagonist is the idea of India, right? The metaphysic India that Murthy finally awakens to. So the question is they're asking you in interrogative, would it be appropriate to comment? Uh, so if you say yes, the real protagonist of Kantapura is India, the idea of India, then you're gonna have to make logical arguments around that, obviously. If you don't think that the real protagonist is India, but in fact Mahatma Gandhi, or the idea of Mahatma Gandhi, then that would also be right. But again, then when we talk about Mahatma Gandhi within the context of the freedom struggle of India, he is the one responsible, partly responsible in a major way of conceiving this idea of India, the idea of new India. So in 1930s, when India was part of the British Empire, the most difficult thing, when India was a conglomeration of 500 plus princely states, most of them under the administrative control of the British Raj. It required a visionary like Mahatma Gandhi to ask for Purna Swaraj. Of course, the Purna Swaraj was not Mahatma Gandhi's slogan, was it? Who gave the slogan of Purna Swaraj and when was it given? Good evening, Sandeep. पूर्ण स्वराज की बात किसने की और वो कब शुरू हुई? You can understand the technical problem, as in to conceive something that doesn't exist, right? This is a major flaw when we think about the Indian freedom struggle, and when we think about those 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 years of the freedom struggle. There is a major flaw when we are studying that in 2022. The idea of India that we have access to now. Now we live in a Republic of India. Now it's one country geographically, demographically, of course, there are variations, but now we have a map, clear map right in front of us. We know that this is India. Back in 1920s or 30s, Mahatma Gandhi did this convention, BHU convention in 1916, I think, and where he invited all the princes and kings. Yes, Purna Swaraj was given by Bal Gangadhar Tilak. Okay. Can you also tell me what year, if you have access to that? So we have access to a Republic of India map. We all know that someone in Kerala, someone in Northeast, someone in Kashmir, someone in Rajasthan. It doesn't matter. We all have access to that one India. Back in 1920s, 30s, that was not the case. Do you understand this? Do you understand this problem? Now, Mahatma Gandhi's mentioned the concept, not Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, in Discovery of India. The whole idea of that book, The Discovery of India, was to understand what India culturally, what Bharat is. Bharat Ek Khoj is that book. I don't know whether the book was written originally in Hindi or originally in English. I've seen it in Hindi on Doordarshan when I was a kid, and it used to be a fantastic series, Bharat Ek Khoj. and beautifully done series. I've read the book partly in English, and he recurringly tries to explore the identity of India. Bharat. What is Bharat? So he traveled the entire country and tried to find that out. India existed not as a politically combined or united country, as in a republic or a democracy, but India existed as an idea of Bharat, the civilizational culture for thousands of years, right? That's why, despite numerous millions of reasons of dispute amongst all the kingdoms, smaller kingdoms that we think about, there was something that combined everyone. Yeah, do you agree to that? Numra deleted her comment. So was it not Bal Gangadhar Tilak? I have no idea who gave the slogan of Purna Swaraj. So the challenge for the visionary leaders at that time, the freedom struggle visionary leaders, was to conceive politically Bharat. Do you understand the challenge? Because Britishers were negotiating with different kingdoms to leave some, to keep hold of some, to leave the unprofitable ones, to leave the areas of the kingdoms where freedom struggle was, too much of a problem for them, and to leave them to have some. At that time, those visionary leaders worked on that civilizational cultural map of India, Bharat, you know, even before the Mughals, because Mughals also never ruled upon the entire landmass, the entire Indian subcontinent, at max 60%, right? So even that was not a civilizational cultural correct map. So they go back to Ashok or Chandragupta Maurya, where the kingdom spanned all the way from Central Asia all the way down to the Southeast Asia. And then they somehow figured out that this is the Pakistan, the Bangladesh, the India, Kashmir. That's Bharat. Swaraj birthright. Yes. So this idea of Poon Swaraj, as in we don't want any negotiations. This is the entire India, despite of all its differences in demography and cultural differences. This all is Bharat, and we want complete Bharat to be independent. Now the Britishers and all those who are opposed to the idea, they were saying that you are not actually a combined, demographically and culturally combined one unit. You're not. That was the argument. That your people are different. Your different people demand different things. People in the south and the Britishers, the British Raj, they always divide and rule. They always created divisions. That's why when we read Passage to India, we understood how E.M. Forster looks at this division and disjunction. You remember the phrase that the entire country is a muddle with division and disjunction. That is how the Britishers wanted to look at it and want others to look at it. Right, right. So Nehru declared Purna Swaraj in 1929. Okay, so that was a landmark narrative. After the 1916 convention of Mahatma Gandhi with the BHU at BHU with all the kingdoms, most of them came this was conceived that the entire Bharat is one, right? So we want to create a country with all the states coming together because culturally we are similar, right? And the Britishers countered it with the narrative that you are not similar. The entire country is mired by division and disjunction, not just on the basis of religion, basis of caste within religions, based on language, based on food habits, based on weather, based on so many different things. They were actual academic papers, scholarly papers who were floated to prove that India can never exist, never work as a single unit. You understand the difficulty, you understand the challenge now, the biggest challenge. Britishers were saying that this is not possible, you cannot do it. It's not. But then people like Gandhi, Nehru, Subhash Chandra Bose, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Lajpat Rai, everyone came together. Those who Mahatma Gandhi did the pedal march, the Padayatra around the country. Jawaharlal Nehru traveled the entire country. All the great leaders traveled far and wide. They they figured out by 1929 Congress Convention that we want the Purna Swaraj. All the kingdoms are on board in principle. First thing that we want is that for British Raj to withdraw, and we have a plan of action how to make it a republic or fuse all the different kingdoms together in the new political structure, new age political structure. So where does this book come? That idea of India that we're talking about, metaphysic India. That's why they're calling it a metaphysic India. That's why what when Mahatma Gandhi talked about Purna Swaraj, Mahatma Gandhi talked about the entire Bharat as one. That's why they're calling it a metaphysic India because it is beyond physical reality. It is beyond even conceivable reality. Harder for us to understand it because we can't see it. We live in a Republic of India, one India, right? So they were within a fragmented country. It was not one country. But how beautiful it is that in terms of civilizational and cultural aspect, it was one Bharat. How beautiful is that? That is the idea of India that Kanthapura proposes via Mahatma Gandhi's narrative. Now, why Kanthapura becomes so important and relevant is that it is a story coming out from a random, remote South Indian village, not a North Indian territory, not in the heat of action. A random, far away, distinct, discreet, that kind of a place. Even that place is profuse with this idea of India. This is what Kanthapura is telling us. This is what Kanthapura told the British. That this idea of Purna Swaraj, this idea of metaphysic India, is now a reality in terms of the mind of people around the country, not just in the power centers of the North India or Delhi or Calcutta. It is stuff that now everyone wants. And Mahatma Gandhi has a big role in that because Mahatma Gandhi's idea Murthy carries forward, right? Exactly. So unity in diversity, अनेकता में एकता. Somebody must have coined that as well. Hmm. So this idea of India that you have to talk about, this idea of metaphysic India, and then the questions will come where like this. How would you respond to the view that of all the Indian novels, Kantapura is the most comprehensively and intimately Gandhian? Discuss how deep and wide is the impact of Gandhi's personality and his thought on the theme of Kanthapura. Uh, so the Gandhian question: how is it uh, Gandhian? How is it inspired by Gandhi? Why Gandhi is important? There are so many different variations of the Gandhian principle. Neelam, hi, good evening. So first of all, you have to be really clear about what ideals of Gandhi Murthy carries forward in the narrative of Kanthapura, right? So I told you that Gandhi's primary weapon, according to me, was tapping into the subaltern voices, people with no voice, hmm? Women, elderly, and lower castes. That became one of his weapons. And he traveled the country far and wide and he talked to those people. Children, women, elderly, and the lower castes. That is one aspect that Murthy brings into the village and tries to get rid of the untouchability and discrimination and all that. More important than that, Gandhian idea was the lowest structure of the republic would be a village. Yeah, there is a term for that. That what's the term that Gandhi used? Village level. The right term. Let me think. Self-sustenance. A self-sustenance model starting ground up from the village level. So villages, according to Mahatma Gandhi, a village was the lowest and the most fundamental basic unit of the country. To empower the country, to make a country prosperous, a village has to be prosperous and empowered. And a village level, from right from the village level, it has to be self-sustained economy, right? That's one of the ideals that Murthy tries to bring in. Of course, the non-violence, non-alignment movement, the non-violence, truth brings in all that. So you have to think about how what ideals of Gandhi Murthy acquires and then he tries to implement and successfully is he able to implement or not. There is this wonderful piece, I think it's from one of the introductions of Partha Sarthi or someone else. Kantapura is the story of how Gandhi's struggle for independence from the British came to a remote village in southern India. The struggle takes the form, on the one hand, of non-violent resistance to Britain, and on the other, of a social protest to reform India. So Gandhi was not fighting the war externally, Gandhi was fighting the war internally first. That's the primary Gandhian principle. That's the primary Gandhian ideology. That first we have to make ourselves better. Discrimination has to stop. Gender discrimination, caste-based discrimination, religion-based discrimination, economic-based discrimination. If you want to fight with the British, with the common enemy, you have to all come on the same ground. That's the simplest idea. You cannot fight a common enemy if you're not united, if you're infighting within yourselves. So the social reforms, and how much do you see there in Kantapura, right? Now, does Murthy succeed by following Gandhian principles? Then you'll have to also decide how do you define success in Kantapura. क्या गांधीयन प्रिंसिपल्स को फॉलो करके मूर्ति कांतापुरा में बाय द एंड has Kanthapura become a better place? Have they achieved their goals? Because you have to consider, you also have to understand a very interesting concept that UPSC asks every few years. The idea of microcosm versus macrocosm. Have you heard of this idea? Hmm. Yes, so Kantapura acting as a microcosm depicting the situation of the macrocosm of the Indian freedom struggle. So whatever you see happening in Kantapura can be very much reflective and representative of the freedom struggle of India elsewhere or the entire freedom struggle. So we have the British Raj represented by some characters like Bade Khan and the state, the Skeffington state. Then we have a typical setup of an Indian society with caste system, religion-based discriminations. Then we have women who do not have any power. We have widows who live outside the village. So it's the setup is very much like a typical Indian setup. Another interesting thing that I realized when I said that Kantapura is a dis in random unknown village somewhere in South India. The fact that it's random, unknown, small, remote village is important because Raja Rao is showing that if Mahatma Gandhi is so powerful in a random village and people are so aware about the independence of India, then that means that it is like this everywhere else. E.M. Foster also picks the city of Chandrapur. And you remember the first line of Passage to India? Good evening, Mr. Farziman. There is nothing extraordinary about the city of Chandrapur except the caves, and they are 20 miles off. There is nothing extraordinary about the city of Chandrapur. So he also deliberately picks an ordinary, absolutely ordinary, discrete, random, unknown place to set up his text. Hmm. The approach of both these novels is entirely different. Kantapura, the freedom struggle is right there. Everything revolves around the freedom struggle. Passage to India, the freedom struggle, the omission, the deliberate absence of the freedom struggle or any hint of it in Passage to India. You see the beauty? You see how great minds work? Same concept, same idea, trying to show their own perspective. This is an Indian writer, obviously, right in the middle of the freedom struggle. He creates a story. That guy, 1920s, he was in India writing around just after Jallianwala Bagh, absolutely in the midst of the burning freedom struggle, and he completely omits it deliberately. Yes, I will add all these videos in one playlist. Okay. So that's the idea of Gandhian principles that you see acquired by Murthy, that you see implemented in Kanthapura. You have to be very clear of that. Then you'll be able to do any Gandhian question. What happens in the end? Everyone goes to the jail. Women come out, led by Ratna, to do a protest. बाद में सबको छोड़ दिया जाता है मार पिटाई करके कुछ कुछ करके and then everything goes back to their regular day to day stuff. Yes, Varun. So in the end you'll say कि कांतापुरा का जो गांधीयन experiment था मूर्ति का it flopped. That's what some students feel. और ऐसा है भी क्योंकि एंड में वहां पे कहानी खत्म हो जाती है. The novel ends. But doesn't it tell you that one man, गांव का एक ordinary लड़का जो कि somebody मूर्ति, before the story starts he was an ordinary guy. Nobody took him seriously. He was nothing extraordinary. One common man, touched by Gandhian ideas, changed the entire village, transformed the entire village like this. Result क्या होता है अब आप this is not a Bollywood movie. This is not Bollywood movie that's going to end on a happy note, happy fictitious note. It ends where it's not an end. So the end of Kantapura is not the end. It's the continuation. This will continue. Murthy gets a little disappointed and disillusioned with the Gandhian idea by the end. But the people have been transformed. Ratna has become a hero. All the women who came out and stood side by side with men, now they're not going back to being what they were before. The untouchability that has been sorted to some level, it's not going to revert back to the old state. The state of the village has been changed for good. The reform has happened. Is that true or not? Yeah. So don't look at it like a Hollywood Bollywood movie where in the end everything is sorted, everything. It's a realistic novel. Raja Rao wanted to show the impact of Gandhian idea on a distant remote village. How powerful Gandhian ideas are, that they traveled so far. He uses Gandhi in the same sentence as Ram and Sita, and he proves it with his narrative. Right? So the reforms have happened. People have transformed. And this is what Gandhi wanted throughout the country. Okay. Okay, Raja Rao's use of English, we'll talk later. We'll talk about subaltern first. What key role does Kanthapura play in the theories of reading the post-colonial literature? Um, Post-colonialism is the study of human consequences of the colonial rule on the natives and their culture. Human consequences of the colonization or colonial rule and exploitation. So what human consequences happen? That's what we study under post-colonialism. This is the simplest and the shortest definition that I can give you. So Kantapura presents you a case where you can study the impact of colonization, India, British Raj's impact on the people of Kantapura. You have to understand what what consequences, human consequences were there. Now, when we look at it from a post-colonial angle, you might think the, the widows, for example, right? The widows who were living outside the village, that was not happening because of the British Raj, was it? Or the untouchability. That was not happening. That is not the impact or the human consequence of colonialism, is it? The division and disjunction in the Indian society, in the Kanthapura society, was not happening because of the British Raj. Yeah, but they did nothing to improve the scenario. Two, they propagated it because divide divide and rule is one of their was one of their prime strategy. So they propagated this division and disjunction, which E.M. Foster has very clearly told us. This this idea of division and disjunction, which is very beautifully illustrated by his the structure of his text and everything, that the way he talks about things. So that's why, even though the situation condition of the widows, the condition of the untouchables is not because of the British Raj, but they did not stop it and they actually promoted it. And then there are a lot of direct consequences of the British Raj. You know, all the uh, atyachar of the British officers and the Bade Khan, they are there. They are there. One primary thing is subaltern, subalterns. Subaltern theory is studied under the post-colonial theory. Gayatri Spivak, Homi Baba, these critics worked a lot on the subaltern, and they said that one of the most uh, subtle, painful impact of colonialism is the creation of subalterns. Who are subalterns? Populations which are socially, politically, and geographically outside the hegemonic power structure of the colony. One of the colonial tactics has always been, and this is as per the critical subaltern theory, one of the tactics of colonialism of these colonial masters had been to create a very centralized power structure within the colony and create subalterns, create a majority of the population, take away their voices, almost like a dictator. Normally, dictator is only one person, or a king as a dictator is one person. Power is extremely centralized in one person. But in a colonial setup, they give you a presumption of a government, of courts, of law, of order, but the power is still very much within a centralized hegemony. And most of the population is kept out. Those who are out, they are kept further out. This is what Mahatma Gandhi and the others tried to reverse. They brought in people into the hegemonic power structures. So people who were geographically outside, that is why Kanthapura is even more important. Because Kanthapura is geographically outside the power center, politically outside, socially outside. So we have those coolie quarters and the untouchable quarters in Kanthapura, socially, politically, geographically outside the power structure of the village. Right? Does it make sense? So the colonial masters, as a strategy, worked to create subalterns. That's why democracy is the absolute opposite of that. No matter how much you try to keep people outside the hegemonic power structure, everyone has a vote. Everyone has one vote. Rich or poor, educated or non-educated, whatever the caste, whatever the religion, everyone's got one vote. And every vote is important. What the colonial masters do is they try to keep 99% of the population outside the hegemonic power structure. So the British Raj would only deal with the king or the kings. That's it. That's where the power structure is. And then all the kings would report to a territorial officer, the governor. And then the governors would report to a higher officer, viceroy or whatever. So the power structure was very, very lean and centralized. And they didn't bother about the population of the kings, the praja or the people. Never bothered about them. They don't have a voice. They ensure that they don't have a voice. What Kanthapura shows is, like I've written at the bottom, Kanthapura shows how even the remotest subaltern society becomes part of the wider Gandhian narrative for independence, which is the main reason behind Gandhi's power, the inclusion of subaltern. Does it make sense? It looks like a pretty complicated concept, but I hope this is all you need to understand. Hmm? They can come a character sketch on Ratna, character sketch on Murti, character sketch on, I don't know, Achakka or any of the minor characters, Bade Khan. So you should do a few character sketches here, there, and this was a 2016 short note. How he uses English. We talked about this in the last class. So for that, the entire answer lies in the foreword of Kanthapura, how he uses the language. For example, when he says that uh, he mimics, he Indianizes the English language. One of the ways he does is, if you start the very first paragraph of the text, this is one long sentence, spoken, written in the spoken format, like because Achakka is narrating it, and she's an old Kannada lady. She has her own rhythm of her language, so that it's written like that with that rhythm, and even bypassing certain grammatical English language rules. There are no commas, there's nothing, and it just goes and goes and goes. High and the low, on the high and the low, and high and the low. You know, the first sentence. I don't have a text with me, but I remember that. And then how they speak very fast, how they change, add add an adjective with every name, like the Rangama. Then there is an adjective. There is a nickname. There is an adjective. So how you have to give some examples of how he Indianizes kind of the rhythm, the usage of the English language, how he does that. So this you should prepare, right? Usage of the terminology of the Kannada language. Okay, I think we covered most of it. And can you see the screen? Okay, can you see this screen? Let me just grab some water. Okay, these are answers of student. She probably will be able to identify these answers. I have taken the liberty to share these answers with you all to show you what a good answer looks like, and what all can be corrected, right? Um, I'll take good answer first. Okay. Now, this is a very good example. Can you see this clearly, right? Increase your screen size if you have to. Zoom it. Can you read it? I think on the phone you probably won't be able to read it. Um, Small. Can you read it properly if you increase the size? Should I increase the font size? I can increase the font size. I'll increase the font size here. Okay, right? I've increased the font size now. This is the question. Now I've increased the font size. It should be okay now. If you watch full screen, you should be able to see it properly. Yeah, now you can read it. What attitude? These are answers from Pride and Prejudice, which most of you must be familiar with. What attitudes to marriage can be discerned in Jane Austen's account of Mr. and Mrs. Bennet, Charlotte Lucas, and Mr. Collins? It should be Lucas and Lydia Bennet and Mr. Wickham. So there are three pairs. This question comes very frequently. The comparison of different pairs from Pride and Prejudice, different characters in paper one. So Mr. and Mrs. Bennet first, then Charlotte Lucas and Mr. Collins, then Lydia and Mr. Wickham. So you're all aware of the story. What attitudes to marriage can be discerned in Jane Austen's account? What attitudes to marriage? So the question is this: what attitudes to marriage can be discerned? What attitudes to marriage? And they're given you three pairs to work with. So the answer starts: Jane Austen, through her characterization in Pride and Prejudice, brings out the various attitudes towards marriage that were, should be were, that were present in the 18th century England. Now, if you can see my comment, this is my comment. This is how I evaluate your answers. This is an actual answer sheet that I evaluate. I have added that various attitudes is not good enough. Expand upon here. Okay, does that make sense? So what you have to write in the very first paragraph, the very first part, which I call the intro argument, is you have to answer this complete question in full. What attitudes to marriage? Jane Austen presents one, two, three, these attitudes of marriage: conservative, liberal, rebellious, whatever way you wanna put, conservative, revolting, rebellious, liberal, जो भी आप चाहें. These attitudes of marriage via the characterization of these three pairs. That would be a complete answer, complete intro. Does that make sense? तो यहाँ पे various attitudes is not going to work. So that's what I pointed out. And when I started reading it, I was very disappointed. This is a very, very bad intro, very bad start. But the rest of the answer is absolutely spot on, both in terms of structure and in terms of the arguments given. As you see, I say here, very good answer. The last part. Every point paragraph is complete in itself, starts with the argument clearly and then expands. Just find a way to give the gist of all these points in the intro. अब देखते हैं कि क्या हो रहा है. तीन जो कैरेक्टर्स हैं, कौन से एटीट्यूड्स की बात हो रही है. फर्स्ट पैराग्राफ. Mr. and Mrs. Bennet. First pair. Mr. and Mrs. Bennet bring out the idea of marriage for passion. एक ये एटीट्यूड हो गया, मैरिज फॉर पैशन. लेकिन अब इसमें इस पैराग्राफ में फंबल है. द स्टूडेंट हैज फंबल्ड. कैसे देखना. Mr. and Mrs. Bennet bring out the idea of marriage for passion. The youthful Mrs. Bennet's charms and illusion of intelligence becomes the sole reason of their marriage. Okay, that's why they got married. However, Mrs. Bennet considers marriage as the ultimate goal of her life. The business of her life was to get her daughters married. For example, while Lydia eloping with Wickham caused Mr. Mrs. Bennet great stress, the news of a marriage to the same made Lydia her favorite daughter. अब ये दो बातें हो गई इस एक ही पैराग्राफ में. When you're talking about Mr. and Mrs. Bennet and their attitude towards marriage, so either you talk about their personal attitudes within the context of their marriage, Mr. and Mrs. Bennet, or you talk about the attitude of marriage of Mr. and Mrs. Bennet as parents. These are two different things. You see the logic here. So this paragraph starts that Mr. and Mrs. Bennet married for out of passion, but it ends with their attitude as parents, and specifically Mrs. Bennet. Mr. Bennet की बात भी नहीं की. Does it make sense? So every paragraph, this is one paragraph. This ideally should be one logical idea only, one logical point. So we have three pairs: Bennett's, Charlotte Lucas Collins, Lydia Bennet, and Wickham. Three. So three paragraphs, one point, one logical point. That's it. That's how lean, how focused you have to be. You cannot fly in all the different directions. Does it make sense? This, what I'm telling you now, you will not find anywhere in the world. Nobody will tell you this like this. Doesn't matter which coaching, which academy, wherever you go. Tell me if it makes sense. Then I'll move to the next point. The question is about attitudes of marriage. So पहले Mr. and Mrs. Bennet के attitudes of marriage बताने हैं. फिर Charlotte Lucas के और Mr. Collins के. फिर Lydia और Wickham के. पहले शुरू किया Mr. and Mrs. Bennet से. Logically this is the right structure. बिल्कुल सही right structure है. Clear है, simple है. लेकिन Mr. and Mrs. Bennet, when the student is talking about Mr. and Mrs. Bennet, there are two kinds of things she is talking about. Mr. and Mrs. Bennet says personal attitudes towards marriage. That's how the answer starts, the paragraph starts, but ends with only Mrs. Bennet's attitudes as a parent, as a mother. So you have to stay with one. Mr. The safer bet would be you talk about Mr. and Mrs. Bennett's attitudes towards marriage as parents. तो उसमें फिर आपको मिस्टर बेनेट का भी बताना पड़ेगा, मिसेस बेनेट का भी. Okay? Does it make sense? Cool. So first point, slightly confusing, but it ends well. Starts with the contradictory statement, as I say. This is my uh, feedback on this. Third point, second point, Charlotte Lucas and Mr. Collins. Charlotte Lucas and Mr. Collins marry for wealth and social stability. And now the beautiful thing about this answer is that it starts every paragraph. Every paragraph is a unit in itself. That's how you have to create your answer. Every paragraph is a single, focused, singular, linear unit. Ideally, it should start right away with what's your point? What are you trying to prove? We are trying to understand attitudes of marriage. Very first line, even the previous paragraph, even though the content was wrong, but the logic was right. The very first line tells you the attitudes of marriage. Idea of marriage for passion. Look at the second paragraph. Marry for wealth and social stability. That's their attitude of marriage. Look at the third paragraph. Ignorant and romanticized attitudes of marriage. Starts right away with the point, with the idea that you're trying to build upon. So the Charlotte Lucas and Mr. Collins marry for wealth and social stability. Lady Lucas says that I ask only a comfortable home. Very, very relevant quote. You should add a very relevant quote during her confrontation with Elizabeth. Further, Mr. Collins, needing the favor of Lady Catherine, goes on a hunt for a suitable bride that would impress the latter and improve his social status. Social status and wealth. ठीक? Clear? Third point. The idea and Mr. Wickham. First statement proposes the idea right away. कोई time waste नहीं. फिर उसको expound करते हैं. While idea considers Wickham the love of her life, she is ignorant about his intentions for her. Mr. Wickham, being a money-minded person and a fraudster, doesn't intend to marry Lydia if he cannot receive £10,000 a year as dowry. His idea was simple. Logically, it's a little incomplete because this idea of ignorant and romanticized attitudes of marriage is Lydia's. Marriage as a convenience is Wickham's idea. Wickham का idea है पैसे मिल जाएं, अच्छी लड़की मिल जाए. Lydia का idea है love, the Bollywood love, but logically correct. And then conclusion. Austin, in contrast to these prevalent attitudes of marriage, emphasizes that the right attitude towards marriage would be to marry out of love for one another, which is witnessed in the case of Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy. Fantastic. Conclusion में जो पूरे नोवेल का जिस्ट है वो ऐड कर दिया regarding attitudes of marriage. From start till finish, the answer revolves only about the attitudes of marriage. It does not digress. तीन केस एग्जांपल्स हैं, तीनों को वन बाय वन टैकल किया है. लॉजिकली द स्ट्रक्चर इज एब्सोल्युटली राइट. सिर्फ इंट्रो में वेरियस एटीट्यूड्स वाली बात है वो गलत है. डज इट मेक सेंस? कोई सवाल आपके? एनीथिंग यू वुड लाइक टू आस्क? I'm trying to find bad answers to show you what not to do. हम्म, किसी को कुछ नहीं पूछना। एक और, दिस इज इजी आंसर, टेक अनदर वन। ठीक है, ये बहुत, दिस इज अ वेरी फेमस क्वेश्चन। The women in Jane Austen's novels are more lifelike than the men. How far is this comment applicable to Elizabeth in Pride and Prejudice? Okay. Um, Elizabeth Bennet is one of the finest and lifelike characters created by Jane Austen. अब ये वाला लाइन मैंने इसलिए कट किया है because this is redundant. It's not adding anything to the answer. ये सिर्फ the most essential aspect that makes her lifelike is that इसको हटा भी देंगे, the answer will not lose anything. Elizabeth is authentic and not too good to be true. Simple. But this is the argument. क्यों लाइफ लाइक है? विमेन कैरेक्टर्स क्यों लाइफ लाइक है? एलिजाबेथ क्यों लाइफ लाइक है? बिकॉज शी इज ऑथेंटिक एंड नॉट टू गुड टू बी ट्रू। मैंने सिर्फ इसमें ये ऐड किया है कि दिस कवर्स व्हाई विमेन कैरेक्टर्स आर लाइफ लाइक, बट प्लीज ऐड अ स्मॉल कमेंट ऑन व्हाई मेन आर नॉट। और आंसर क्वेश्चन में नहीं पूछा गया मैन के बारे में, दे आर स्पेसिफिकली आस्किंग अबाउट एलिजाबेथ। बट क्योंकि कमेंट कोट में है women characters are more lifelike than the men, तो आप एलिजाबेथ के कंपैरिजन में डार्सी की एक लाइन लिख दोगे तो इट बैलेंसेस इट। डज इट मेक सेंस? नहीं भी लिखोगे तो इट्स फाइन, इन इट्स प्रेजेंट फॉर्म इट इज एब्सोल्युटली फाइन। What we are discussing right now, we are discussing student answers. I am taking an actual answer sheet that I evaluated. This student is part of my test series, and I am just showing what makes for a good answer. सबको क्लियर है? अब व्हाट मेक्स एलिजाबेथ लाइफ लाइक, दो कीवर्ड्स दिए हैं आपने, ऑथेंटिक एंड नॉट टू गुड टू बी ट्रू। ठीक है, इन दोनों को एक्सपेंड करना है। वट एवर आर्ग्यूमेंट यू गिव इन द इंट्रो, दैट हैज टू बी एक्सपेंडेड। ऐसा नहीं है कि आप इंट्रो में कुछ और बताते हो एंड आगे कुछ और। एलिजाबेथ हैज हर फॉलीज, सेकंड पैराग्राफ, she commits mistakes despite being the most intellectual woman among all other women characters in the novel. She is quick to judge Darcy's actions. She is quick to believe Mr. Wickham's tales about Darcy, but when she realizes her mistake, she feels the guilt, is ashamed of her prejudice, and wholeheartedly apologizes for the same. Pehla point, she has her follies. She is not a perfect stereotype heroine. Life like hai. Second point, Austen creates a wholesome picture of Elizabeth, which doesn't happen with the male counterpart. Wholesome picture है. The reader gets to experience her thoughts, dilemmas, emotions, feelings, actions in great detail. This does not happen in the case of Darcy, Collins, Wickham, or Mr. Bennet, who are most often shown from Elizabeth's perspective. इसलिए भी लाइफ लाइक है, क्योंकि उसको बनाया ही लाइफ लाइक है, बाकी किसी कैरेक्टर को इतना स्पेस ही नहीं दिया। दिस इज व्हाट दिस पैराग्राफ इज सेइंग, लॉजिकली बिल्कुल करेक्ट है। क्योंकि हम व्हाट आर वी आंसरिंग, वी आर आंसरिंग व्हाई इज शी लाइफ लाइक एज इन ऐसा कैरेक्टर जिसको आप, जिस पे बिलीव कर सकते हो, द गर्ल नेक्स्ट डोर। जिसे विद स्मार्ट येट गलिबल, थर्ड पॉइंट। अब आपने देखा होगा कि तीनों पैराग्राफ्स की जो फर्स्ट स्टेटमेंट है दैट इज स्पॉट ऑन, तीनों पैराग्राफ्स की। दैट्स हाउ यू शुड स्टार्ट। First line, no beating around the bush. Okay, fantastic answer again. This is also a very good answer. Pride and Prejudice opens with the ironic narrative voice, and it is on one of the readers here throughout the novel. So this was the first set of answers that the student sent me, and I was surprisingly pleased. I was happy, more than happy. मजा आ गया था मेरे को ये आंसर्स पढ़ के. I was amazed. And then of course now the student is part of my answer evaluation group that we started a couple of weeks ago. Some students have left. Again, I only took very few students. Most of the students came back to prepare for the mains, hoping that they'll clear the prelims. So I'll find out. So unfortunately, if there are any backouts that students who will not be preparing or who will be, I don't know, getting out of the test series, some spots will open. So anyone, if you would like to join the answer evaluation, there is a monthly and there is a complete test series option. So do email me on upsc.english@gmail.com. Okay, do check out if I have the spots. Only serious students, only sincere students, and so I think let's stop it there. How not to write answers? You mean the bad answers? I'll show in the next class. I have a lot of evaluations to do, a lot of answers that I have received. So I'll pick some from there. I'll take the permission of the student because sharing good answers is a good thing, but nobody would be happy to share their bad answers. So I'll have to talk to the student without naming if I can share some bad answers. In fact, there are no bad answers. It's all a learning phase. Everyone starts writing irrelevantly and inappropriately. So it's just sticking with the logic. Everything has to be logical. You start absolutely spot on, answer the question, understand the question, answer it very clearly and simply, very directly. Bring in your argument and then expand upon that argument. Okay? So, on that note, I'll see you on Friday, hopefully Friday morning, and we'll start with T.S. Eliot's The Journey of Maggie, the first of three poems by Eliot. Read up, finish reading, write some answers, join the answer evaluation service if you're up for it, and I'll see you in the next class. Take care. Bye bye. Have a good rest of the